Welcome to Wild Horse Writes. My name is Sandra, and again today we'll be exploring Excel. So where we left off last time, we made up our little fake database, our little data set, and then we went ahead and made two macros. We made an absolute value macro, and we made a relative macro, and we showed you how to enable your developer tab and how to actually record macros. So we again discussed that recorded macro is not a bad thing, so don't let people discourage you from using it. If you have a simple straightforward task like bolding and underlining or something like that, it's the ideal choice, especially if you don't feel like learning programming. Now, as we discussed last time, you can actually look at your macro by going into Visual Basics editor. So you can click on this button under the developer tab which says Visual Basic, or you can actually press Alt F11, which I like because it's just a short key. Alright, let's get it loaded up. There we go. And last time we kind of chickened out and we closed it really fast, but this time we're in it. We're gonna do it. Now, before we actually get into how the code looks, it might be kind of intimidating. It might be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this. You've probably seen this before. If anybody's ever asked you to install a macro or go over a macro or whatever, or I need you to delete a macro from your thing, or I want you to upgrade your macro, change them out, you've probably seen this before, and they probably told you to file, import your macro, and they probably told you to right click it and remove it or something like that. So you likely have some experience in maneuvering around the editor. So let's give you a small tour. Okay, so this is going to be your window where you can actually see the macros. So if you want to get to this window, you can always click this little icon. It says View Code. So this is a little button to toggle the folders, so we need the folders to keep us organized. This basically shows us which workbook we're working in. So we're working on the workbook video instructions. It has a little list of all the sheets, and of course it has all the macros. So these are probably the ones I deleted already. Let's just remove them. It's going to ask you, do you want to export? What that basically means is, do you want to save a copy of this code before you delete it? Let's look at some more things. So this is your save button to save your macro. This lets you choose between items you want to create. So mainly these videos, I haven't gotten into that, so I'm not gonna go over those, but the user form is how you make those lovely little answer choice boxes, and the module is basically the macro. And you'll have to make a module in order to launch your little user form. This play button lets you play your macro or run your macro. You can pause it. You can stop it in the middle of running. So this lets you name your macro. Depending on what object you're working with, you'll have more options here. If you wanted to save your macro and let someone else use it, you could export it also. Now let's see if we can learn some code before we actually look at our recorded macro. So the way this coding language is worded, it's all focused on objects. Type it, Sandra. Type, Sandra. That's normally how people talk. If they wanted me to go ahead and get started and type the macro, you would say type, Sandra. Well, in VBA language, it's going to be Sandra, type. I want to show you a key feature of VBA editor and VBA coding. If you put a little apostrophe beside anything you type, it becomes green and it becomes a comment. When Excel reads it, it basically skips it. This is for when you write a macro and you want to remember what it was doing, or you want the next person after you, like after you get promoted and you move on because you made so many cool macros. At that point, whoever's taken over will need to know what your macro did in the steps in case they need to fix it or modify it for a new process. And you'll a lot of times see online, if you go to Microsoft Help or whatever online, a lot of people for new coders, they go ahead and put comments for people so that you can follow along with what they do. This will make your font bold or something like that, so you know what each step in the macro does. And also people sign it, so you can sign it and date it, so in case you want to know, well, when was this made, why did this have this issue? Oh, well, this was made back in 2019, so that's why it's not running properly. Well, that's how it looks in English and how it is in normal writing. When you're writing a macro, and we'll put in this sentence again, Sandra is the object, and then type is the verb, and in VBA language it's also called the method. So basically whatever you're doing. Written in code, this would be Sandra.type. So this is the object and this is the method, this is what's being done. A question we might ask though is, who is Sandra and why exactly is she typing anything? So what we need to do is basically describe the object and kind of narrow it down, and this helps your code perform more accurately. So in this case, what is Sandra? Sandra is an analyst. Analyst type. So basically it's gonna say Sandra the analyst, type it. Now we're gonna do it in code. Okay, it's gonna be Sandra analyst, so I'm specifically describing what kind of Sandra it is. It could be Sandra doctor type, Sandra vet type, Sandra dog walker. Which Sandra is it? It could be any Sandra in the world. We gotta tell it which Sandra we're talking about. And this specific Sandra is an analyst, so we specify by typing Sandra, we put a little parentheses, we put the exact quote of what kind of Sandra it is, and then we end the parentheses, and then we still tell it the verb, which is type. Pretend like you're just learning French. It's like an exotic language, but way less interesting and way less romantic unless you write really good code. Now remember last time I said that not all of the information that is recorded is necessary for the macro to run. So what we're going to try to do is rewrite some of these from scratch, and also go ahead and show you how to clean up your macro. So let's take a look at the first one. This is a non-relative, so this is absolute macro. So in this case, what is the first thing this macro has on here? It's a sub. Sub is like starting a great sandwich. Like, just think of it as building. Sub is what you do when you want to make an action. Now there's also functions, but we're not going to get into how to do that now. We're just going to start with the sub. Every time you have a sub, and let's go ahead and make a new, I'll show you how to go ahead and make a new module. This is the new macro. When you first start writing it, of course you write sub and you have to name it. Now we're going to give it a name, and I'm used to just using underscores. We're going to do non-recorded macro exact, or we'll do absolute. Wow, I want to stress the importance of naming it something human beings can read and understand. Do not name this 88859PQ. No one knows what 88859PQ means. We don't know. And what they'll have to do is go back when they add a macro to their bar. They'll have to go back and rename your macro. Don't make them do work to use a macro. The idea of a macro is to be simple and straightforward. They should not have to figure out how to rename your macro. Do it for them and do it right. So we put exactly what we want it to be, the way we wanted it, and we end it with these little parentheses here. It will automatically add in sub to your code. Don't have to do it, it does it on its own. And if for some weird reason you deleted it, just type in sub. And notice how these are blue. Now, we're gonna go ahead and let's try to put some comments. So put our apostrophe. This is a non-relative manual macro. And I apologize if you hear some dog noises. Fred is trying to hold back the chihuahuas. They're trying to get in the video. I don't know why, but they are. So let's start with the first part of code. What is this code saying? The one that we recorded. It says range, parentheses, quotation marks, A1, colon, D1, quotation mark, parentheses dot select. So remember, this is the object of our sentence. So the range, which is A1 through, see if I can move it. The range, which is A1 through D1, we want to dot, basically we put in a period, select. So that's our verb. We want to select it. Now, we don't necessarily need to select it in a manual macro. So that's why people will get annoyed with these recorded macros, because you don't need to select it. You could just tell it, I want you to go to range. Look how helpful VBA is. You type in range and it automatically gives you prompts to tell you how to fill it in. So we basically did the same thing. We're not doing select though. We don't need to select it. We've already told it where it is. So now I'm going to go ahead and proceed to change the font. So the second line of the recorded macro says selection, which is range A1 through D1 font. What are we changing on the selection? We're changing the font. Think of font as sort of like the verb. We're fonting it. I don't know. We're gonna change the font. And what kind of font do we want? You can actually click that. And then we're gonna do, it gives you options. Once you press a period behind the font, you get to, if you don't know any coding, it shows you what to do. So we can just do a drop down box, or we can type bold. That's so neat. Is it really bolded or is it not bolded? We're gonna say true. So let's save it. Remember what I said, you can actually go into your VBA editor and we're gonna click this play button. Magic! Look at that, it bolded it, and we were able to skip that whole selection part because we went straight to the meat and bones. We said, forget about that selection, we're not selecting anything. I want you to go to range A1 to D1. I want you to font it, take the font, change it, make it bold, and yes, I mean it, it's true. See, that wasn't confusing at all. That was so easy, wasn't it, Fred? Fred nodded. Okay, we're gonna make another macro. We can just close him out. Let's look at our relative macro. Now this was a little bit tricky. So remember, we gotta start with sub, manual, relative macro. Okay, so then alright, we put our comment. So what are we gonna do? Let's look at the actual code. Let's try to clean it up a little bit. So active cell, think about it as sort of like your cursor. Wherever you left your cursor, we want it to start there. The active cell is whatever cell you have clicked into. So as you can see by the way they arranged it, range. So basically we're telling it, start in this active cell and drag it over this active cell and drag it over 4 spaces. When we do this though, we're not telling it the absolute reference. We're telling it wherever whatever you have it clicked in, I want you to go ahead and select 4 cells that would be in the same position as A1 to D1. So for 1 row, 4 cells across. Basically what we're telling it to use. But instead of selecting, remember, we don't need to select it. We can font it. Let's take font. And then we want to bold it again. Bam, you got it. So let's try it out. So you can either run it here, or we can go back to our editor and let's try it out. Fingers crossed. Let's see. I'm gonna try it in G. So hit play. Wow, it worked. That's great. So now if you follow along and if you followed those simple steps, you've made your first manual macro. So pat yourself on the back. Even though we used the recording to kind of base it on it, we still had to edit that. And that's what you'll do. Once you make your recording, you can go back in and pick the parts that you actually need and sort of clean it up. And the way you experiment is you save it, And then even though you cannot undo what a macro does to your spreadsheet, you can undo changes to your macro. So if you didn't see this little button before, this undo delete, you can undo your actions to your macro. So let's say if I was to go and I want to delete part of this out because I don't think I really need it, and I try to run it and there's an error. It goes, uh-oh, you made a mistake. You can click undo and have your whole code back, and then you know, well, I can't delete that part. So it's a lot of hands-on learning. And I think that will be enough for this short video today. Join me again next time when we'll try to do something a little bit more interesting and figure out some if-then statements, or try to work on a user form. Whatever I think of that'll be easy next. Looking forward to seeing you. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, leave it in the comments below. Thank you.